Picture this. You're dead asleep on a bed of scratchy straw, crammed into a tent with 7 other guys who haven't bathed in weeks. The air smells like unwashed bodies, leather, and that distinctive aroma of men who've been marching through mud for days. Then suddenly, a horn blares across the camp, like someone's trying to wake the dead. Congratulations! You're about to experience a day in the life of a Roman legionary, and trust me, hitting the snooze button isn't an option. Welcome to roughly 100 AD, somewhere along the wild frontiers of the Roman Empire. Maybe you're in Germania, where the forests are thick and the barbarians are thicker. Or perhaps you're stationed in Britain, where it rains more than a broken aqueduct, and the locals have an annoying habit of painting themselves blue. Doesn't really matter where you are. Every morning starts the same way for Rome's finest fighting men. That horn you just heard, it's not a gentle wake-up call. It's more like someone screaming, "Get up or die," in musical form. The sound cuts through the morning air with all the subtlety of a gladius to the gut, and it means business. Within seconds, you're supposed to be on your feet, grabbing your gear and stumbling out into the cold dawn air. No time to stretch, no time to contemplate the meaning of life, and definitely no time to wonder what your mother back in Rome is making for breakfast. The camp around you is already buzzing with activity that would make a beehive look lazy. Thousands of legionaries are pouring out of their tents like ants whose hill just got kicked. The scene is organized chaos, men shouting, metal clanking, and the sound of hobnailed boots hitting packed earth. Every single one of these soldiers knows exactly what they're supposed to do, because the alternative to knowing is usually painful and involves a lot of yelling from very angry centurions. Your tent mates are probably in various states of alertness. There's always that one guy who somehow managed to sleep through the first blast of the horn and is now frantically trying to put his armor on backward. Then there's the veteran who was already awake before the horn sounded, probably sharpening his gladius or checking his equipment for the 100th time. These old-timers have been through enough campaigns to know that being ready 5 minutes early is better than being ready 5 seconds late. The morning air is crisp and carries the smell of cooking fires, horse sweat, and that indefinable scent of a military camp that's been in the same spot for weeks. Smoke rises from various points around the camp, where the cooks are already preparing the morning meal, though calling it a meal might be generous. It's more like fuel for the human machine, designed to keep you moving rather than to make you happy about it. Now comes the fun part, morning muster. This isn't just roll call where someone checks if you're still breathing. This is a full-scale inspection where every man, every piece of equipment, and probably every thought in your head gets examined under the stern gaze of your officers. You line up in formation with military precision that would make a geometry teacher weep with joy. Shoulder to shoulder with your brothers in arms, shields at your sides, spears held just so. The centurions start their rounds, and these guys don't miss anything. They've got eyes like eagles and attitudes like bears with toothaches. They're checking your armor for dents, your weapons for rust, your sandals for wear, and your face for signs that you might be thinking about something other than serving Rome. One speck of rust on your gladius could mean losing your rations for the day. A loose strap on your armor might earn you extra duty. And if you're unlucky enough to have fallen asleep on watch the night before, well, let's just say you're going to remember this inspection for a long time. The inspection process is thorough enough to make a tax collector jealous. They check the edge on your sword. It better be sharp enough to shave with, though hopefully you're not testing that theory on your face. Your shield gets examined for cracks or loose bindings, because a broken shield in battle is about as useful as a chocolate teapot. Even your personal belongings get the once-over, because a Roman soldier is expected to maintain standards in all aspects of his life. What makes this whole process even more intense is the silence. Nobody's cracking jokes or making small talk during inspection. The only sounds are the clink of metal, the shuffle of feet, and the occasional sharp comment from a centurion who's found something that doesn't meet his exacting standards. It's like being examined by the world's most serious doctors, except these doctors carry whips and have the authority to make your life miserable in creative ways. The officers doing the inspecting aren't just checking boxes on a list, They're evaluating whether each man is ready to march into battle at a moment's notice. Because that's the thing about frontier life. You never know when some local tribe is going to decide that today's a good day to test Roman steel. Every piece of equipment could mean the difference between coming home with your shield or on it, as the saying goes. But here's what really drives home the seriousness of it all. The consequences of failing inspection aren't just embarrassing, they're genuinely painful. Roman military discipline wasn't known for its gentle approach to correction. A rusted weapon might cost you your daily wine ration, which doesn't sound too bad until you realize that wine was often the only thing that made the water safe to drink. Loose armor straps could earn you a flogging that would leave marks for weeks. The worst part about these inspections isn't even the fear of punishment, it's the shame of letting down your unit. Roman legionaries lived and died together, and everyone knew that one man's carelessness could get his tent mates killed. The guy next to you in formation wasn't just your bunk mate. He was the person who might have to save your life when the barbarians came charging over the hills screaming war cries that would make your hair stand on end. Once the inspection wraps up and everyone's been deemed fit for another day of serving the empire, the real work begins. And by real work, I mean the kind of physical training that would make modern fitness instructors quit and find easier jobs, like wrestling bears or teaching teenagers algebra. The Roman military didn't believe in easing into the day with a gentle warm-up. They believed in hitting the ground running, literally. First up, weapons drill. Even if you've been a legionary for 10 years and could use your gladius to perform surgery in the dark, you're still going to spend hours practicing the same basic movements over and over again. Thrust, parry, shield work, footwork. All of it drilled until it becomes as natural as breathing. The instructors don't care if you're tired, if your arm hurts, or if you think you've mastered these techniques already. They care about making sure that when some barbarian warrior comes at you with an axe, your body responds correctly without your brain having to think about it. The training grounds echo with the sound of wood hitting wood as legionaries practice with wooden swords against wooden posts. These practice weapons are actually heavier than the real thing, which means that when you finally get to use your actual gladius in combat, it feels light as a feather. It's like training with ankle weights. Everything becomes easier once you take them off, except in this case, taking them off means someone's probably trying to kill you. Formation marching comes next, and this is where the famous Roman discipline really shows itself. You've got hundreds of men moving as one unit, shields locked together, spears at identical angles, every footstep hitting the ground at exactly the same moment. It sounds simple until you try it wearing 60 pounds of armour, while some drill sergeant screams corrections at you in Latin that would make a prostitute blush. The coordination required is absolutely mind-blowing. Imagine trying to get a few hundred of your friends to walk in perfect sync, except your friends are carrying deadly weapons, and one wrong step could impale the guy next to you. The formations these guys practiced weren't just for show either. The testudo or tortoise formation could turn a group of individual soldiers into a moving fortress. Shields locked overhead and on all sides, creating a shell that could advance under a hail of arrows without losing a single man. But getting it right required timing that would make a Swiss watchmaker jealous. One person moves too fast, the whole formation falls apart. Someone's shield slips, and suddenly everyone's exposed to enemy fire. What really gets your attention during these drills is how the centurions never seem to get tired of yelling. They've got voices that could wake the dead, and vocabularies that would make a tavern keeper cover his ears. Every mistake gets pointed out with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for announcing gladiator matches. Drop your shield a few inches too low. That's 5 minutes of very personal feedback delivered at maximum volume. Take a step out of rhythm. Congratulations, you just became the example of what not to do for the next hour. The heat during these training sessions is absolutely brutal, especially if you're stationed somewhere like North Africa or the Eastern provinces. The armor seems designed to trap every bit of heat and reflect it back at your body. Sweat pours down your face, stings your eyes, and makes everything slippery. Your hands get so sweaty that gripping your weapons becomes a challenge all by itself. Some guys would pass out during the longer drills, which only earned them more training once they came to. But here's the thing that really shows how serious this whole operation was. Even the veterans, guys who'd been through multiple campaigns and had enough battle scars to open their own museum, still had to go through the same drills as the fresh recruits. There was no, "I already know this," or "I've done this 1,000 times." Everyone practiced together because muscle memory saved lives, and muscle memory required constant reinforcement. The weapons training got particularly interesting when they brought out the specialized equipment. Javelin throwing wasn't just about chucking a pointy stick as hard as you could. There was technique involved. The right grip, the proper stance, the exact moment to release for maximum distance and accuracy. A good legionary could put a javelin through a shield at 50 paces. A great one could do it while running in full armor, with enemy arrows flying past his head. Sword work was even more demanding. The gladius might look like a simple stabbing weapon, but using it effectively required understanding angles, timing, and leverage that would make a mathematician proud. The instructors taught specific combinations: thrust high, slash low, shield bash, backstep, until these movements became automatic responses. They'd set up scenarios where you had to react to different types of attacks, because barbarian warriors didn't all fight the same way. By the time the sun reached its peak, every muscle in your body would be screaming for mercy. Your armor felt like it weighed twice as much as when you put it on, and your throat was drier than a desert wind. That's when the most beautiful sound in the Roman army rang out across the camp, the horn signaling mealtime. Suddenly, all those exhausted legionaries found enough energy to move with surprising speed toward the cooking areas. The midday meal was the highlight of most soldiers' day, though that says more about the quality of the rest of their daily routine than it does about the food. What you got was filling rather than fancy, a thick porridge made from whatever grains the supply wagons had brought, sometimes with chunks of meat thrown in if the foraging parties had been successful. Bread was a luxury when you could get it, usually flat and tough enough to use as a weapon if you ran out of javelins. The wine they served was more like vinegar that had given up on life, but it was wet and it had alcohol in it, which meant it killed most of the things in the water that could kill you. Smart soldiers learned to drink it fast before their taste buds figured out what was happening. Some guys would mix it with water to make it go down easier, creating a drink that was barely tolerable instead of actively offensive. What made mealtime special wasn't the quality of the food. It was the chance to sit down, take off your helmet, and remember what it felt like to be human for a few minutes. Conversations would start up for the first time since dawn. Guys would share news from home, complain about their officers, or speculate about where the legion might be heading next. It was like a brief vacation from being a killing machine. The portions were carefully calculated to give you enough energy for the afternoon's work without making you too comfortable. Roman military planners had figured out the exact amount of food needed to keep a soldier functional, and they weren't particularly interested in exceeding that amount. Waste was considered almost treasonous, especially on campaign where every grain of wheat had to be carried on someone's back. But even during mealtime, the discipline never completely disappeared. You ate when you were told to eat, you sat where you were assigned to sit, and you finished when the horn told you to finish. Taking too long could mean missing out entirely because the afternoon duties wouldn't wait for anyone to savour their porridge. As the meal wound down and soldiers started checking their equipment for the afternoon shift, you could see the machine of the Roman army preparing to shift into its next phase. The morning had been about preparing for war. The afternoon would be about building an empire. The afternoon shift brought a completely different kind of exhaustion, the bone-deep tiredness that comes from turning wilderness into Roman territory, one shovelful at a time. While the morning had been about perfecting the art of war, The afternoon was about the unglamorous business of building an empire that would last 1,000 years. Guard duty was probably the most mind-numbing assignment you could draw. Picture standing on wooden ramparts for 4 hours straight, scanning the horizon for enemies who probably weren't coming while trying not to fall asleep and earn yourself a beating. The view was usually pretty monotonous: endless forest, empty plains, or whatever barren landscape Rome had decided needed conquering this week. Your job was to watch for anything unusual, which sounds simple until you realize that after the first hour, everything starts looking unusual when you're bored out of your mind. The worst part about guard duty wasn't the boredom, it was the consequences of getting caught slacking off. Roman military justice had a special hatred for guards who didn't take their jobs seriously. Fall asleep on watch, and you might wake up missing your daily rations for a week. Get caught sitting down when you should be standing alert, and you could find yourself explaining your lack of dedication to a centurion who expressed his disappointment through creative use of a vine stick across your back. But here's what made guard duty truly nerve-wracking. You never knew if this would be the day something actually happened. Most days were peaceful enough to make you wonder why you needed guards at all. Then suddenly, without warning, a hunting party of local warriors would appear on the ridge, and your boring afternoon would transform into a life-or-death situation faster than you could shout an alarm. The guards who survived long enough to become veterans learned to stay alert, not because they loved staring at empty landscape, but because complacency was a luxury they couldn't afford. The rotating watch system meant you'd spend 4 hours on the ramparts, then get relieved by the next shift. During those precious hours off duty, you might get assigned to construction work that would make modern road crews look like they were taking a vacation. Roman engineering projects were legendary for their scope and permanence, but they didn't build themselves. Every stone had to be quarried, shaped, and placed by hand. Every timber had to be cut, hauled, and fitted with tools that would make a modern carpenter weep. Road building was perhaps the most back-breaking work in the Roman military repertoire. These weren't just dirt paths that would wash away with the first heavy rain. They were multi-layered construction projects designed to last centuries. The process started with digging a foundation trench that was perfectly straight and precisely graded. Roman surveyors could lay out a road that ran for hundreds of miles without deviating more than a few feet from a perfect line, which is impressive considering their most advanced measuring tool was basically a very fancy rope. The foundation layer consisted of large stones fitted together so tightly that you couldn't slip a knife blade between them. Every stone had to be individually shaped with hammers and chisels until it matched perfectly with its neighbours. Your hands would be raw and bleeding by the end of the day, and your back would feel like someone had been using it for javelin practice. But the work had to be perfect, because these roads would carry Roman legions for generations. On top of the stone foundation came layers of gravel, sand, and smaller stones, each level carefully graded and compacted until it was smooth as a marble floor. The final surface was made of fitted stone blocks that created a roadway so smooth and durable that some of them are still being used today, 2,000 years later. Working on road construction meant you were literally building the infrastructure that would allow Rome to move armies and supplies across vast distances with unprecedented speed and efficiency. Fort construction was even more demanding because it involved every skill a legionary was expected to master. Carpentry, masonry, earthwork, engineering, all of it had to be done quickly and correctly because your life might depend on how well you built those walls. A Roman fort wasn't just a place to sleep. It was a miniature city designed to house hundreds or thousands of soldiers, along with all their equipment, supplies, and support personnel. The earthwork alone was staggering in its scope. Before you could even start building walls, you had to dig ditches, move tons of soil, and create defensive positions that would channel attacking enemies into kill zones where Roman weapons could do maximum damage. The standard Roman camp design called for ditches 6 feet deep and 8 feet wide surrounding the entire perimeter, Multiply that by the circumference of a major fort, and you're talking about moving enough earth to bury a small town. Timber work required skills that most soldiers had to learn on the job. Cutting down trees with hand axes and saws was exhausting enough, but then you had to shape those logs into precisely fitted walls, towers, and gates. Roman military engineers had developed standardized construction techniques that could turn a forest clearing into a fortified position in just a few weeks. But those techniques required every soldier to know how to handle an adze, how to cut mortise and tenon joints, and how to raise heavy timbers without modern lifting equipment. The stonework was where Roman engineering really showed its genius. Quarrying stone meant finding the right kind of rock, cutting it into manageable blocks, and somehow moving pieces that weighed several tons without benefit of modern machinery. Roman soldiers developed techniques for splitting stone using wedges and hammers that could produce blocks so perfectly shaped they seemed almost machine-made. Moving these massive stones required elaborate systems of ropes, pulleys, and human muscle power that would challenge modern construction crews. What made all this construction work particularly brutal was the pace at which it had to be completed. Roman military doctrine emphasized speed in everything, and construction projects were no exception. A temporary camp that would be used for just one night still had to be built to full defensive standards. A permanent fort had to be completed before winter set in, or before enemy forces could organize an attack. There was no such thing as taking your time, or doing just enough to get by. The tools available for all this work would seem primitive by modern standards, but Roman soldiers learned to use them with extraordinary skill. A good legionary could shape stone blocks with nothing but hammers and chisels, cut timber joints that would last for decades, and move massive weights using only rope and leverage. These weren't specialized craftsmen. They were fighting soldiers who happened to be incredibly versatile construction workers when the situation demanded it. Between construction duties and guard rotations, there were always smaller maintenance tasks that kept the camp running smoothly. Equipment needed constant attention because metal tools and weapons would rust if not properly cared for. Leather goods required oiling and repair to prevent them from cracking or rotting. Even something as simple as keeping the latrines clean and functional was a job that had to be done by someone, and that someone was usually whoever had drawn the short straw that day. The afternoon work details created a different kind of camaraderie than the morning combat training. When you were struggling to move a massive stone block or trying to fit a stubborn timber joint, rank mattered less than muscle power and problem-solving ability. Veterans would work alongside new recruits, sharing techniques and shortcuts that made the work easier. The centurions still maintained discipline, but the atmosphere was more collaborative than the rigid hierarchy of weapons drill. What really struck you during these afternoon work sessions was the scale of what Rome was attempting. Every fort, every road, every bridge was part of a vast network designed to project Roman power across thousands of miles of hostile territory. The road you were building would connect to other roads that stretched from Britain to Egypt. The fort you were constructing would serve as a supply depot for campaigns that might not happen for years. You were participating in an engineering project that dwarfed anything attempted by previous civilizations. The physical demands of construction work were relentless, but there was a certain satisfaction in seeing tangible progress at the end of each day. Unlike combat training, where success was measured in improved technique and muscle memory, construction work produced visible results. The wall was higher, the road was longer, the ditch was deeper. You could point to something and say, "I built that," which was more than most people in the ancient world could claim about their daily labor. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, and the afternoon work details started wrapping up their projects, the camp would gradually transition into evening mode. Tools were cleaned and stored, work sites were secured, and soldiers began the process of cleaning themselves up for the evening meal. The transformation from construction worker back to professional soldier happened gradually. but it was unmistakable. The approaching evening brought its own routines and challenges, but it also offered the promise of rest after a day that had tested every muscle in your body and challenged skills you might not have known you possessed. Being a Roman legionary meant being ready to switch from warrior to engineer to labourer at a moment's notice, and somehow excelling at all of it, despite the fact that you'd probably rather be back home in some Italian village complaining about the weather and arguing with your neighbours about whose turn it was to fix the community well. Well, turn it was to fix the community, as dusk painted the sky in shades that would make an artist jealous. The horns signalled the end of the workday with a sound that was somehow both relief and warning, rolled into one musical note. Your muscles ached in places you didn't know could ache. Your hands were probably bleeding from various construction mishaps, and you smelled like a combination of sweat, dirt, and whatever unfortunate substance you'd been working with all afternoon. But the day wasn't over yet. Roman soldiers didn't just clock out and head to the nearest tavern. The evening routine started with something that might surprise modern people: prayer. These weren't gentle bedtime prayers asking for sweet dreams and peaceful sleep. Roman legionaries offered up quick, practical prayers to Mars, the god of war, basically asking him to keep them alive through whatever tomorrow might bring. Picture hundreds of battle-hardened soldiers, still covered in the grime of their daily labour, taking a moment to acknowledge the deity who supposedly had their backs in combat. Some guys mumbled through it like they were reciting a grocery list, while others seemed genuinely invested in making sure Mars knew exactly what they needed from him. The prayers weren't long-winded theological discussions, more like business negotiations with a divine entity who had a reputation for appreciating directness. Keep my sword sharp, keep my shield strong, and please don't let me die in some embarrassing way that my family will have to explain to the neighbours. That was basically the gist of most evening prayers, though the actual Latin was probably more formal and definitely involved fewer references to embarrassing deaths. What made these prayer sessions interesting was how they reinforced unit cohesion without anyone having to make speeches about brotherhood and loyalty. When you're standing shoulder to shoulder with your tent mates, asking the same God to protect all of you, it creates a bond that's hard to break. These men might argue about everything from whose turn it was to clean the latrine, to whether that last dice game was fair. But when it came time to face Mars together, they were united in their desire to survive whatever the Empire threw at them next. The religious aspect of Roman military life wasn't optional either. Skip the evening prayers, and you'd find yourself explaining your lack of piety to a centurion who took spiritual discipline as seriously as weapons maintenance. The Romans believed that keeping the gods happy was just as important as keeping your gladius sharp, and soldiers who didn't participate in group religious activities were seen as threats to unit morale and divine favour. After the prayers came the evening meal, which was usually a repeat of the midday fare, but somehow tasted better when you were exhausted enough to appreciate any food that wasn't moving on its own. The same porridge, the same tough bread, the same wine that could strip paint off a chariot, but after a day of physical labour that would kill most modern gym enthusiasts, even military rations started looking like a feast fit for emperors. The evening meal was when the day's tensions finally started to ease up a bit. Conversations became more relaxed, though never completely informal. This was still the Roman army after all. Soldiers would share stories from their hometowns, complain about officers who weren't within earshot, or speculate about upcoming campaigns with the kind of dark humour that develops when your job involves regularly risking violent death for other people's political ambitions. Some enterprising legionaries would use mealtime to conduct small business transactions that technically weren't supposed to happen, but were tolerated as long as they didn't interfere with military efficiency. Trading rations, gambling with dice made from animal bones, or bartering personal items for small luxuries like better quality wine or softer sleeping materials. The centurions knew this stuff was going on, but they also knew that completely crushing every bit of individual initiative would create bigger problems than a few harmless black market transactions. The most valuable currency in these evening exchanges wasn't money, it was information. News from home was worth more than gold to soldiers who might not hear from their families for months at a time. Letters were read aloud and shared, creating informal networks of information that connected Roman soldiers across vast distances. A letter from Rome might contain news that would be passed from tent to tent until half the legion knew that grain prices were up or that there'd been gladiator games in the Colosseum. But the evening wasn't all relaxation and casual conversation. Roman military discipline didn't take a break just because the sun was going down. Equipment still needed to be cleaned and maintained. Personal gear had to be organized for the next day. And various administrative tasks had to be completed before anyone could think about sleep. Your armor needed to be checked for damage, your weapons needed to be cleaned and oiled, and your personal kit had to be arranged according to regulations that were specific enough to make a modern military handbook look casual. So there you have it, a single day in the life of a Roman legionary, from that brutal dawn horn to collapsing onto straw bedding that probably hadn't been changed since the last emperor died. These weren't just soldiers, they were the ultimate multi-tool of the ancient world. Warriors, engineers, construction workers, and somehow still finding energy to pray to Mars at the end of it all. The next time you think your job is tough, just remember, these guys built an empire, one back-breaking day at a time, armed with nothing but discipline, determination, and the knowledge that screwing up meant consequences that would make your worst performance review look like a love letter.